So there is a Shanti mantra, an invocation for the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. The central message of this invocation is that the whole existence, including what we experience and what is beyond our experience, the finite and infinite, are essentially the same. The central principle of Advaita philosophy is put in the form of an invocation. Now, before I begin a discussion on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, I just want to give you a brief, general idea of its place in Hindu philosophical canonical tradition. As we all know, Vedas constitute the origin and the ultimate word and conclusion of Hindu cultural, philosophical, and spiritual traditions. It is believed that the Vedas were one in ancient times, and they were classified into 4 groups called Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharvaveda by the great philosopher saint called Vyasa, who is one of the celebrated figures in Hindu cultural heritage, spiritual tradition. And he classified Vedas into 4 groups and taught each of these 4 sections to one of his disciples. So Yajurveda was taught to Vaishambhayana. One part of Yajurveda came to be known as Vaishambhayana tradition. And later it had a bifurcation called, it is called Krishna Yajurveda and Shukla Yajurveda. So Krishna and Shukla together, these two divisions constitute one single Yajurvedic tradition. Rigveda was taught to Paila, the name of a rishi, a great saint who was Vyasa's disciple. He received instructions on Rigveda. Vaishambhayana received instruction on Yajurveda. And Samaveda was taught to another great saint who was Vyasa's disciple called Jaimini. And Atharvaveda was taught to Sumantu, the 4th disciple. Along with these 4 Vedas, there are 6 auxiliary branches of learning which you should study to get a clear understanding of the teachings of the Vedas. That's something very interesting, very important. Maybe in modern times, this is not always practical in the modern university culture, but in India, in ancient times, and even now also among the traditional scholars, especially those who study, and those who begin their Vedic education when they're very small, maybe 5 or 6 years. When you are a little boy, you have to begin your Vedic education. So in these ancient traditions, there were 6 auxiliary branches of Vedas, which is taught. It's called Veda Angas. Angas mean limbs. Shiksha, Kalpam, Vyagaranam, Niruktam, Chanda, Jyotisham. In Sanskrit, Shiksha means pronunciation, phonetics. This is a very important branch of Vedic learning. So, in fact, there were many phoneticians, many saints who specialized in pronunciation. So, Paniniya Siksha, Naradiya Siksha, All these Siksha means phonetics. In fact, it includes more than phonetics, the science of phonetics, not the method of phonetics. Not just they were pronouncing words, consonants, syllables, and diphthongs. But more than that, the underlying philological principles behind phonetics are also included in that branch called Siksha. Vyakaranam means grammar. So I think I already mentioned earlier the grammatical principles that we follow today in modern Sanskrit. And modern Sanskrit means a Sanskrit that we have been using from 9th century BC. That's what's called modern Sanskrit, you should remember. Modernity in Sanskrit means Sanskrit became a modern language in 9th century BC when the Sanskrit usage and patterns were standardized by a great grammarian called Panini. The Bible of Sanskrit grammar is called Ashtadhyay, a great well-known book with 8 chapters. So the Vedic grammar did not actually follow the modern principles of grammar. So Vedic grammar, according to Vedic grammatic tradition, the meaning of a word has much less to do with what lexicon, what the dictionary says about it. It depends upon the context and also the person who uses a word. So prakarana vaividhyat, pravaktuhu vaividhyat, that's a two methods of interpreting words. Prakarana means context. Pravakta means the person who uses the word. So words differed, words had various meanings depending upon the context and the usage and the person who uses that. Anyway, I don't have time to go into details, an entirely different technical subject, and you may have to study Sanskrit a lot before getting an introduction into Vedic grammar, which right now I cannot. I have no time to discuss in details. Another one is Kalpa. Kalpa, a third branch of Vedic studies, Kalpa. These are all auxiliary branches of Vedic studies. Kalpa actually means the science and the techniques and methodology of performing Vedic rituals. Those of you who are interested can refer to a well-known book, maybe the most exhaustive study of Indian Vedic ritualism. So the author is Fritz Staal, was a Dutch philologist and linguist who studied and taught in Berkeley, the university, and who wrote a well-known book. The name of the book is Agni. Agni itself means the fire sacrifices. So you can get 2 volumes. Each volume is as big as a single volume of Encyclopedia Britannica with hundreds of plates and pictures. So very costly, expensive book, 2 volumes. So that then another important branch is Niruktam. Niruktam actually was some kind of a dictionary and thesaurus put together. Because Niruktam means it was a particular school of interpreting Vedic sounds. Nairuktikaha means the linguists and philosophers who followed Nirukta school of interpreting words. So Nirukta was the first attempt to give a meaning, a technical meaning to Vedic sounds. The other was Yaska. And of course, Kalpa, there were many others, there were Ashwalayana, Baudhayana, Apastamba, Katyayana. They were the great Vedic ritualists who interpreted Kalpa. Vyakarana, of course, I mentioned there were many Vyakarana, Shagadayanas, and others who pre-Paninian grammarians. Nirukta book was written by Yaska, who wrote the well-known book Niruktam, it is called. So it contains all technical analysis of important Vedic Shabdas, Vedic words, or from almost 500 Vedic Suktas. Remember, 500 Vedic mantras, and the Rig Veda itself contains close to 11,000 mantras, and a few hundreds of these mantras were taken by Yaska, and he analyzed grammatically. He analyzed this Vedic terminology. So, Devo Danadva Deepanava Dusthanava Bhavati, an example, almost like Thesaurus, like a poem. Veda means, Deva, Devo, Danadva, Deepanadva, Dusthanova Bhavati. Deva means God, angel, not G capital, not monotheistic anthropomorphic God, but G-O-D, G small letter, means almost like angels, corresponds to angels in Christian tradition. So that's called Deva. So who is a Deva? Deva is one who lives in the celestial regions, who listens to your prayers, and who lights the lamp of lights light within your heart. These are different meanings that he gave to the word Deva. So Devo, Danadva, Deepanadva, Dyotanadva, Dusthanava, Bhavatiti. These are 4 different options for understanding the word Deva. I'm just giving an example, Nirukta. Then the 5th one was Chandas. Chandas actually means different meters, Vedic meters, Gayatri, Ushnik, Anushtuk, Brihati, Pankti. These are some of the meters. Vedic mantras were composed in following certain Vedic meters. And then the 6th one is Jyotisha, Vedic astrology. So Vedic astrology also includes Vedic astronomy and partly Vedic mathematics, because don't remember, not a computer astrology, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an ancient science of analyzing human destiny based on pure mathematical calculations, and also the position of stars and galaxies. Whether you believe in astrology or not, you have to admit the rational principle of, let us say, the mathematical process was it included in this Vedic astrology. So that was the 6th one. So you have 4 Vedas and 6 auxiliary branches of learning called Vedangas. Then there were Upangas, auxiliary to the auxiliary one. That is Purana, mythological books, Nyaya, logic, Mimamsa, ritual, the science of rituals, Dharma Shastra, the ethics and morality, all these principles called 4 Upangas. So total 14 and 4 more. We call Upavedas, Ayurveda, Dhanurveda, Gandharva Veda, and Arthashastra. Ayurveda, so Ayurveda is one of the Upavedas. So those who tell you that Ayurveda, Indian school of medicine, had a Vedic connection, they're perfectly correct when they say, because Ayurveda, who were taught and expounded by Charaka and Susruta, was considered to be one of the Upavedas, means subsidiary Vedas. Dhanurveda, the Indian martial arts, the the science of archery, and many of the ancient sciences of Indian martial arts were included in the Dhanurveda. And Gandharva Veda was actually the science of Indian music and Indian dance and popular performances. Bharata Muni was a saint. He was the one who wrote it. And Dhanurveda is attributed to Vishwamitra, Parashurama, and others. Ayurveda is attributed to Charaka and Susruta. And Arthashastra. Arthashastra included the science of sculpture. You have seen the huge Hindu temples. Cambodia, Angkor Wat. You may have heard of these ancient Hindu temples. They were all built by artisans, sculptors into these statues of deities. They're all sculptured according to certain scientific formulae and principles. And that branch of learning was one of the subsidiary Vedas. It is called Arthashastra. So these are the 18 branches of Vedas. Purana Nyaya Mimamsa Dharma Shastra Nisritaha Vedas Sthanani Vidyanam Dharmasya Chaturdasha Idihasa Purana Abhyam Vedam Sabuvaru Brughayi Iti. So this is an ancient sloga which if you want you can ask me to explain, then I shall explain during interaction. Now coming to Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. What is the place of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad? That is our present context. Brihadaranyaka occupies a special place in India's, to be more specific, Vedantic philosophical tradition. It is the most profound and it is the most celebrated Upanishads. Altogether, we know about 180 Upanishads. Of them, 36 are important. Of these 36, 10 Upanishads are very important because Shankaracharya wrote commentaries on them. Of these 10, Brihadaranyaka is the largest, the most celebrated, and considered to be the most authentic. So also Shankaracharya's commentary on the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, along with Brahma Sutra Bhashya, occupies the most celebrated positions in the pantheon of Vedantic canonical literature. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad belongs to Yajurveda. Yajurveda means it's called Shukla Yajurveda. So the another Upanishad that belongs to Shukla Yajurveda is Ishavasya Upanishad. It has got 6 chapters. And these 6 chapters are divided into 3 sections. It is very voluminous. And you have to remember, there are elaborate rituals explained, profound philosophical ideas, philosophical systems explained and expounded. And there are dialogues. And surprisingly, the first and maybe the most celebrated women philosopher you ever hear of, you ever read about in ancient literature appears in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And her name is Gargi. Can you imagine in any other Sumerian, Assyrian, Babylonian, or any ancient civilizations, a lady coming forward and faces an assembly of kings and scholars and challenges as a champion, who is ready to debate with me among you? Now this particular section, this dialogue between the greatest philosopher saint of those days, called Yajnavalkya, and the greatest woman philosopher of the age, Gargi, is called Gargi Brahmanam. That particular Brahmanam section of the Brihadaranyaka is called Gargi Brahmanam. Yajnavalkya and Gargi. The huge debate taking place is considered to be, by according to Hume, Schopenhauer, Paul Deussen, because these Western philosophers, the early European Indologists, who happened to hit upon the Brihadaranyaka, they found it so mind-boggling in this ancient philosophical literature dating back to 3rd, 4th century BC. A woman philosopher, she's a great saint, comes and challenges a king, a celebrated emperor, and the greatest philosopher of those times for a debate in the assembly of great pandits and scholars. So Gargi Brahmanam. So there are 3 sections, 3 main sections in this Upanishad, one is called Madhukandam, Yajnavalkya Kandam, and Khila Kandam. The first and second chapter called Madhukandam, 3rd and 4th called Yajnavalkya Kandam, and the fifth and sixth is called Kilagandam. Today, I'm going to discuss what I consider to be the most interesting discussion because of its simplicity, and within a maybe just about half an hour or less, I have to wind up the discussion without giving an introduction to the structure and the place of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad in Hindu Vedantic canonical literature. I won't be able to give an idea of the uniqueness of this text. So I'm going to discuss today this particular section. It's called a kind of Jyotir Brahmanam, it is called. That section is called Jyotir Brahmanam. Jyoti means light. Now, in this Brahmanam, Atman, the highest reality, Brahman Atman, is conceived to be the inner light, that called Atma Jyoti. So the absolute reality is depicted, conceived to be the source of all knowledge. Light corresponds to knowledge. So here, when we use the word Jyoti, its literal meaning is light. It doesn't mean just light. It means something in whose presence things get revealed. So it is equivalent to knowledge. So the dramatic dialogue opens like this. Janaka was a great emperor. And remember, he's a historical person. Janaka was the emperor of a kingdom called Mithila, which is today part of India's Bihar state. Because Mithila was the capital city. It is actually a district right now. So that was one of the centers of Sanskrit learning, Vedic learning in ancient times. So he was the king, and this city was the capital of this empire. So he is sitting on the throne, and the greatest and the most celebrated Vedic sage and philosopher enters the court, and Janaka and other scholars stand up from their seats and welcome him. Now, this is a common practice in ancient India. So when you think of those days, you can imagine how far we have walked backward in culture and civilization and refinement. That is the most shocking thing. The more you read the Vedas and Upanishads, the more you are shocked and you feel ashamed. So what distance we have traveled backward in culture and refinement and civilization. That is true the whole world, not only any particular part of the world, So in this place, Janaka is sitting and the greatest philosopher is entering, and there all the Pandits are standing. Then Janaka puts some questions to the philosopher. The first question is, it is simple. The questions are somewhat deceptive. There are 5 questions. See, Yajnavalkya Kim Jyotirayam Purusha iti Aditya Jyoti Samrat iti Hovaja Aditya Navayam Jyotishaste Pallayate Karma Guride Viblate iti Evamevaidat Yajnavalkya. This is the first mantra. Those who know, they can see second mantra of the 4th chapter, the 3rd Brahmanam, so to speak. Second mantra, 4th chapter, 3rd Brahmanam. Brahmanam sometimes in English books may be given as sections. So the question is, hello Yajnavalkya, can you tell me what light helps people, or any person for that matter, to walk about, to do their duty, to sit in a place and to return to the place? In fact, what is the light that helps a person? The simple, in the midday, about 12 o'clock noon, if somebody asks you what helps you to see the road in front of you, you say the sunlight. So the reply is, reply is simple. Aditya Jyoti Samrat. Hello, Emperor. It is sunlight that helps people to move about. Then Janaka's second question. Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Kim Jyotirayam Purushaidi. Third mantra, same context. Chandrama Evasya Jyotir Bhavati. Suppose the sun is set in the west. What light helps you? The reply is simple, obvious. Moonlight. Chandramasa eva ayam jyotishaste pallayade karma kurude vibalyati iti. Evam eva eda Yajnavalkya. Is it moonlight helps you? Sun has gone, moonlight has come. So moonlight helps you to move about, to do your work, to somewhere, and to come back to the place, to your place. Third question. Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamide Kim Jyotirevayam Purushaidi. Sunlight, there is no sunlight, sun is set in the west. No moonlight. Then what light helps you? Agnerevasya Jyotir Bhavati iti. Then fire. You may start a matchstick, you may start a fire, or you may strike a matchstick. Some kind of a light phenomenon, you use fire. Any manifestation of fire you may use. And it is firelight that helps you. Then the fourth question. Remember, these four questions may appear to be very simple, but it is in an ascending order. The Upanishad is taking you, leading you by your hand to the highest spiritual truth. So the setting is deceptive. Questions are simple. The obvious answer is simple, but the ultimate answer is the most profound spiritual truth. That's what Yajnavalkya is slowly unfolding. Then Janaka asked the next question. Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamide Shante Yadnu Kim Jyotirevayam Purushaidi. The sun has gone. There is no moonlight, no fire. Or rather fire is put out. You have started a small fire is put out. Then what light helps you to sit in a place, to do your work, to move about? How do you come to know things happening around you? Then the answer is Vagevasya Jyoti Bhavati. The Jyoti, the light is Vak. Vak means speech. From hearing a sound, you will know what object is making the sound, where it is making the sound, whether it is coming towards you or not. Though you cannot see in sunlight, there is no sunlight, there is no moonlight, there is no fire. Still, by using your power of hearing, your sense of hearing, you will know where the object is and whether it is approaching you. All these you will know. So the sound acts as light. Light means something that gives you knowledge about something. Light reveals other objects, and light self reveals itself. So that these are two important characteristics of light. An object, a table or a chair, gets revealed by light, but light not only reveals other objects, but it also reveals itself. So, Vak eva asya jyotir bhavati iti. Vacha eva ayam jyotishaste pallayade karma gurude vivalyati iti. Tasmad by Samrat Abhi yatra sa panirna vinijñayade ada yatra vagucharadi vaivat tatra neti iti, etc. Now, so far it is clear. It is very simple. Then the final question and answer to that final question. That is the beginning of philosophy in this particular Brahmana. Third Brahmana is called Jyotir Brahmanam. It has got 38 mantras and is considered to be the most celebrated part of this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So this is only the one I'm going to read right now is only 6th mantra. There are 32 mantras coming. In these 32 mantras, here it is not mantra in the metrical form. It is some kind of a paragraph. So Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is in prose, not in verses. According to linguists and philologists, among the Upanishads, those Upanishads which are in prose are considered to be more ancient than the Upanishads which are in verses. So Brihadaranyaka, the whole text mostly, except a few verses, mostly they are in prose. So the sixth section or paragraph poses Astamide Astya Aditya Yajnavalkya Chandramasi Astamide Shante Akno Shantayam Vachi Kim Jyotirevayam Purushayati. So Astamide Aditya Yajnavalkya means sun is gone. Chandramasi Astamide, the moon has set. Shantayam Agno, I mean the fire is, there is no fire. And Shantayam Vachi, Shanti Agno Shantayam Vachi. There is no word or there is no speech also. You can't hear anything. You cannot hear. There is no fire, no candlelight, no moonlight, no sunlight. Is there any way that you can know things? So, in answer to this, to this question, the answer is Atma eva asya jyotir bhavati iti. Atma is the jyoti. In fact, it is this Atma, this self with capital S, is the Atma which is the real source of all light. The sunlight, the moonlight, the word, and the fire, the candlelight, all can function as light only when there is the light of Atman within you. But this Atman is gone, then other lights will lose their functionality or the ability to function as light. They cannot reveal anything. When the Atman is not there, you can't hear, you can't see. Maybe there is sunlight, we cannot see. So, Yajnavalkya is coming to the answer. Atma eva asya jyotir bhavati iti. Well, when you are sleeping, let us say, there is no sunlight, there is no moonlight, and there is no word. You are sleeping silently in a dark room and you are seeing things within you. So what is the light? You can see yourself walking on the highway, driving on the highway, and you can see people around you, experience things around you. Though you are deep asleep, you are not making use of any of the external light. So the real light is not external. Sharirendriya Vetiriktam Atma, in the Upanishad says, the Atma Jyoti, the light of the self, light of Atman it is distinct and different from the body-mind complex. So that is the only real light. So actually, when we withdraw ourselves from these external lights, then only we start our journey in search of our inner light. We call it introspection, we call it meditation. You can very easily find this happen in our life. You read a line or a verse in a book and you close the book. Close your eyes. So no sunlight, no moonlight, no fire, no candle. And you don't hear anything. At that time, you go deep and deeper and deeper into the essence of what you have read. So actually, what you read remains within you very vividly. And then he reveals more and more of its meaning, its implications. So many of the great statements of philosophers and spiritual teachers, we get the real meaning or we higher meaning. Only we are able to read more meaning into them only when we close our eyes, when we close our body mind complex to external light. So the internal light begins to burn, becomes a revealing factor only when the external lights are shut off. So that's even an example. So Atmana eva ayam jyotishaste pallede karma kurude vipallite didi, etc. Now, in this Upanishad, the Upanishad teachers tell us that this Atma Jyotisham Jyoti, the light of all lights. All other lights borrow their ability to function as lights from Atma Jyoti. When Atma Jyoti is there, all other lights become lights. Otherwise, no. Now, in answer to this explanation, the king asked more questions. What is this Atma? Which is this Atma? Etc. Katama Atma iti. What is this Atma? In answer to this, Yajnavalkya says, this Atma is present in the senses, in the functions of the senses, in intellect and mind. And this Atma is distinct and different and beyond the senses, mind and intellect. But because this Atman is present, the intellect is able to function as intellect, the mind is able to function as mind. In the coming sections, there are some very interesting passages which I shall just refer to quickly, and then we have interaction. So those of you have the text, you can remember the 4th chapter, 3rd Brahmana, that is Jyoti Brahmanam. 18th and 19th mantras are very, very important because they present before us some wonderful imageries. One imagery is called Mahamatsya Drishtanta. Drishtanta means analogy, example, or metaphor. A huge fish. A huge fish is, it actually, its central place is the middle of the river. But it's free to move to one bank of the river and then to the opposite bank. Tadyatha Mahamatsya Ubhi Kuli Anusanjaradi Purvam cha Aparam cha Evamevayam Purusha Eto Ubho Ando Anusancharadi Swapnantam cha Buddhantam cha. How this Atma functions and experiences different objects in waking state and dream state. This Atma moves from waking state where it functions as a witness and experiencer of all external things at the gross level, waking state, and then it moves the opposite bank like a huge fish moving to the opposite bank, and then it goes to dream state, and then again it comes back to waking state and dream state. This is one interesting example. It's called Mahamatsya Drishtanta. It has been quoted in hundreds of other scriptures. And then 19th mantra is called Shena Drishtanta. That is suppose a bird, it moves all over the place. It is tied to a pole, but or maybe it has its own little cage and it moves everywhere. Finally, after getting exhausted, flying all around, it comes back to its own little cage where it takes rest. Like that, this Atman It moves everywhere in waking state and dream state. In both waking and dream states, it experiences pain and pleasure. It experiences good and bad, pain and pleasure, pleasant and unpleasant. Finally, it comes back to its own real abode, that is deep sleep, Sushupti state. Like that, every day we actually come back to our own home, spiritual home, but we are not aware of it. What is our spiritual home? A state where we don't experience anything, where we experience the real inner bliss, total restfulness, complete tranquility. That is the state of deep sleep. It's called the Sushupti state. So this analogy, the metaphor of the bird moving about and coming back to its own little small cage, exhausted, coming back to its own home, is given as an example of this Atman after being exhausted in waking and dream state experiences, coming back to Sushupti. So look here, Yajnavalkya is giving an example, taking examples from nature and everyday life. If we can come back to spiritual home by restraining our mind, by practicing renunciation, unselfishness, by meditation, then it will have a complete lasting effect on our system. Every day, we are actually coming back to a spiritual home, that is Sushupti or deep sleep. But that is an automatic, natural process. Elsewhere, Chandogya Upanishad also tells the same thing. Simhova, Vyagrova, Mashakova, so all the animals also will have this deep sleep. They come back and they remain animals. If we can practice spiritual disciplines, prayer, meditation, unselfishness, purity of mind, sadhana chatushtaya, and Sravanam, Manana, Nididhyasana, which I have explained in this context many times. Through spiritual disciplines, if we can experience this tranquility, this coming back to our own spiritual home, discovering our own transcendental spiritual identity within ourselves, not outside, then we will be calm and quiet, we will experience this inner bliss. So these are some of the metaphors taken from the Jyoti Brahmana. Please remember, it's a very exhaustive, very huge work. I have given just a few examples. Maybe sometime later, depending upon different circumstances, I'll be happy to give more analogies, more info, more classes on the same subject. Thank you, Namaskar. Now we are open to questions and interactions. Thank you.
Hariom Swamiji.
Hariom.
Yeah, so I have a question for you. You were talking, all of the descriptions that you were giving for this this inner principle, this Atman, were all qualitative in nature, right? You were talking about how you were talking about the analogies of the massive fish and the bird, or something that is experienceable when you cut out the outer light and you see in the inner light, and so on. So these are all qualitative descriptions of the Atman. Is there a quantitative description of what this Atman means? What does it mean?
Yeah. No, really, every kind of experience that gives you happiness and bliss is a fragment of this bliss. It's called Ananda Mimamsa. Is an important subject in Taittiriya Upanishad. Taittiriya Upanishad mentions. To give an example, a healthy person, physically healthy, very rich, is an emperor, and he has wonderful things to enjoy in this world. That is some kind of happiness. Then the Upanishad tells, if you multiply this infinitely, beyond any imagination, that is the joy you will have. That is the bliss that you will experience when you get Brahmajnana. So how do we, this is a big question, how do, all the books tell you that Atmajnanam, spirituality, mystical experience, Jiva Brahma Aikyam must be different names you may call it, or you may call it Christian experience in Christian theology. You may call it, so in Origen and Eckhart. No, well, this kind of being one with God, feeling proximity with God in monotheistic religions, Vaishnava tradition, Shakta tradition, all monotheistic traditions. Or within Vedanta, let us say this experience, mystical experience of Jiva Brahma Aikyam. What does it mean in our real life? It expresses itself as a kind of inexplicable, indescribable feeling of contentment. That's what it means. In fact, that's what you are seeking all the time. When you go to Stanford to get a PhD, you are actually seeking for some kind of bliss, really speaking. From that PhD is a bliss. The job you get is a bliss. Become a great scientist is a bliss. After that, what you are really looking for? Somebody who writes a poem. By writing the poem, somebody is a musician, he composes a music. He performs, he does a great performance. Why does he do that? Or people who struggles to make lots of money, billions of dollars. Why? We are actually looking for some kind of inner bliss. The inner bliss can be called satisfaction, need fulfillment, actualization of our desires. Call it anything, whatever you want. Even a kindergarten child, he goes to kindergarten. Of course, at that time he may not be aware of this. Or a primary school student who works hard to get a high grade is actually looking for some kind of a fulfillment. And the purpose of fulfillment is some experience of this bliss. And Taittiriya Upanishad tells you, this is called Ananda Mimamsa, ascending order. It's a quantitative. I'm talking about quantitative. Ascending order of joy and blissfulness. So it gives, Asisto, Drishto, Balishtaha, that's where it begins. Those of you chant in the temples, I know that. The meaning is somebody who is strong, healthy, well-to-do, rich and powerful. He has wonderful things to eat and wonderful things to enjoy. He has the willingness and has the ability. He is actually going through some kind of a bliss. You multiply this bliss, let us say trillions, by trillions, then you get an idea of this Ananda. Ananda means blissfulness. Well, how to Ananda, really speaking, is beyond description, beyond definition. But you can always give indications. That's why Vedanta says linga. Linga means indication. In the last class I mentioned, no, it is Thursday class, Bhashya class I mentioned. There are many Sudhi, Linga, Samakhya. There are different ways of trying to understand things. By hearing, by name, giving it name, whatever it is, by sthanam, by context. Now, even the smallest, even if you eat chocolate, I'm giving an example. Eating chocolate, that minute when it is moving within your mouth, you are feeling some kind of a joy. That joy is a fragment, a tiny, minuscule fragment of the highest spiritual bliss. A saint, a mystic who has experienced the presence of God everywhere in everything, he doesn't care for these lower manifestations of bliss, really speaking. So this Ananda Mimamsa is a very important topic in Taittiriya Upanishad. Since you are all regular students of Vedanta, so you should read that Ananda Mimamsa in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Okay? So it's a quantitative assessment of the feeling of blissfulness, and this is mentioned in all world scriptures. You know, let's say a spiritual seeker who has to face a lot of obstacles. Mostly you find in these Christian mystics, persecution, exorcism, expulsion from monasteries. All this happened in the case of some of the great Christian mystics. Still, they could withstand all these obstacles because they were feeling a kind of inner joy when they were practicing prayer, meditation, contemplation, reading scriptures, etc. So these practices gave them a great joy, which actually gave them the mental health to withstand difficulties. So, as I mentioned, when we realize our true nature, that we are the Atman, then that expresses itself as an inexplicable feeling of contentment, joy, and tranquility, peace. Because Kridarthada it is called, you know, Kridarthada. Kridartha means what I'm looking for, that I have gained. Artha means the goal, the purpose. Krida means already acquired, obtained, accomplished. Okay? Thank you for the question. Very wonderful question.
Thanks, Swamiji.
I'm very grateful for some of you who asked very thought-provoking questions, you know, thought-provoking questions. Wonderful. Thank you.
Pranam Swamiji, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So, in the episode that you recited, when King Janaka asks, "What is this self?" and in one of the sections, Yagyavalkya talks about an intermediate stage between this world and the next, and he seems to imply as if you have awareness because of your samskaras of the past world, and you can also foresee the future because of the Atman's light. I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
In the coming section, in fact, in the third Brahmana, one important subject that is discussed. No, it comes to the fourth Brahmana. The subject is discussed. How we leave this world and how we go to the next life. That is being described maybe in the fourth Brahmana. This is the third. Jyoti Brahmana is third Brahmana, fourth Brahmana. So that's a very interesting subject. Now, it says, a person when he dies, his physical body, of course, it disappears. But there is a subtle body called Sukshma Sharira, which consists of mind and intellect, the five senses of perception, five senses of action, and the five pranas, so pancha pranas, this jnanendriya and karmendriya. And of course, there's an extended interpretation also. So whatever we thought, whatever we did, whatever we spoke, all our experiences, as a subtle form, will accompany the person when he dies. It's called Sukshma Sharira. Well, in modern language, it is our real personality. See, the physical body it has something to do with the parentage, physiological pedigree, genealogical heritage, your length and weight, all this you may inherit from your parents and grandparents, either maternal or paternal lines. But there is something else in you which has nothing to do with your family, either a parental, a maternal or paternal line. You are one lonely traveler. And according to Vedanta, in this life, you, by sheer accident, you happen to be born as the son or daughter or husband or wife of this or that person. In previous life, you are something else. The next life will be something else. So there is one. So in a way, we are lonely travelers. So that continues moving, rotating I mean, from life cycle to life cycle. That personality, that samskaras, they will come back to you and they will accompany you when you leave this body to the next life. But if that person has practiced vairagyam, renunciation, and through spiritual practices he has understood that he is one Atman, that is distinct and different from all this body mind complex, all the thought processes, samskaras. If you realize the truth, then these things will not accompany you because they have become completely exhausted. So mostly we behave, we act, we live according to certain samskaras that we have brought with us from previous life cycles. And they are actually prompting us to do certain things in a certain manner or differently. They accompany us when we leave this world. But so that is the dynamics in the fourth Brahmana, it comes. But at the same time, if a person practices meditation, renunciation, and he realizes the actuality, the truth, that he is beyond this psychophysical complex mechanism, then he is freed from this rotating wheel. Then he will become one with Atman. His cyclic rotation comes to an end. That's the idea.
Swamiji, one small clarification I'm seeking. In that section, he likens this intermediate stage to a dream state. And he says, just like in dream, you have awareness. There is an awareness that you have because of the Atman. And that part was not very clear to me.
When the Upanishad the fourth Brahmana mentions that we move from one life to another life as we move from Jagat state, waking state to Swapna state. That is a very powerful metaphor, really. We move from waking state to dream state. Similarly, we transmigrate from one life to next life. So the point is, in dream state, whatever we have acquired, whatever samskaras, impressions, tendencies we already have acquired, in waking state, they are present in dream. They are not present in a very physical sense, but they are really present. That's why we experience plurality and multiplicity and diversity in dream state, just as we experience in waking state. According to Vedanta and Yoga psychology, Patanjali didn't deal with these subjects, mostly Vyasa and other commentators, but says, when you have a tendency, when you recollect a memory or an impression, and you remember form and sound very vividly, then that memory comes from this life. Because your present eyes have seen that. See, suppose you have seen an elephant, some kind of a strange animal when you are a little boy of 5 years. You remember now. That's because with these eyes, you have seen that animal and you are able to recollect. But suppose you go to, let us say, Himalayas, let us say some pilgrim places you go, and you get the feeling, I've been here earlier. Or when you read a book you have not read earlier, you feel a kind of inherent feeling of familiarity. Now, what does it mean? You have not been there earlier, you have not read any of those books earlier, but you feel a strange kind of familiarity. What it means is that samskara comes from previous life. So Arthur Brunton, when he went to Tiruvannamalai, where he felt that he has come to a place that actually he was familiar with. I can conclude today's session with one of the most celebrated events that be very, very wonderful. in the life of Holy Mother Sri Sharada Devi, there's an interesting incident. She was visiting Benares, Sanchi in Benares. Benares, it is it has a long history with Buddhism. With the Buddha first preached there in Benares. Actually, his first sermon was delivered in Benares, maybe in 400, maybe 510. Sorry, not 500, 425 BC, something like that. Now, Holy Mother Sri Sharada Devi was sitting Benares. At that time, there were many disciples of Sri Ramakrishna who were visiting her. Then she found many European means Western, we don't know from which country, Western tourists were eagerly watching and were wonderstruck at the relics of ancient Buddhist temples, Hindu temples, Buddhist viharas that are scattered ruins in near Benares. So they were staring at it, they were looking. Now, then some Indian disciples, devotees asked Mother, Holy Mother, see, these Westerners, they are staring at it. What do they understand? Something why are they so much impressed by this? The Mother said they were the ones who built it up in their previous life cycles. Now they have come back again and watching at the whole thing now. These are not real words, but this is the quotation. I'm not quoting the real words. You can find this in Mother's reminiscences, Gospel of Holy Mother, etc. So the point is, but these ideas are so powerfully explained in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The whole dynamics of rebirth, reincarnation, the journey from one life to another life. So in dream, you actually relive many of what you have experienced in waking state, but differently. It is subtle, it is abstract. And also when you come back to waking state, then also you have a vague memory of dreams. Nobody remembers dream completely. Dreams also are recollected the way waking experiences are recreated in dream. So also in waking state, you recollect dream, but it is impossible for anyone to give a vivid physical account of the whole dream because there is a barrier. Like there is a barrier from one life to another life. So that's why when you recollect something physically with name and form, that memory comes from a previous experience in this life. But when you recollect it as an idea, as an abstract idea, then it comes from one of your previous life cycles. That's the idea.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you. So we will conclude now. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Pranamastu.